New polling released today shows growing support for impeaching the president. Monmouth University poll shows 44% now think Trump should be impeached and removed from office compared to 35% just last month. And remember, last night's CNN poll showed the number shifted 10 points in just days. And yet, Washington Post reports the White House has not set up a war room of any kind to coordinate its response to the impeachment inquiry. Post reports some Republicans have, quote, pushed the White House to offer more guidance to its defenders by standing up a centralized, organized response effort. Back with us tonight, Sam Stein, politics editor for the Daily Beast, and Tarini Pardee, national political reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Good evening, gang, and welcome to you both. And Sam, we'll start with you.
Sure.
I want to ask you the same thing I asked Jeremy Bash. Is it going to turn out, do you think, the Mueller report lands with a whimper and not a bang, ditto his testimony? Is it going to turn out that an understandable phone call and a much easier to tell story is going to make the difference?
Well, it's certainly more digestible politically for Democrats that I talk to. The idea of a president exerting influence on a foreign leader to investigate a domestic political rival is something that people can easily comprehend and understand it to be wrong, as opposed to 10 difficult to explain acts of potential obstruction and vague Russian Twitter handles messing with our election. So, yeah, I think, in the end, this might be politically more potent than the Mueller report was. That being said, I don't think you can take these things individually. The Mueller report did lay the foundation for a lot of the momentum behind impeachment that built over the summer. And that if it weren't for that, we might not be in a place where a majority of the House Democrats, the House itself, is saying they favor an inquiry. I think this is built up on each other.
Sam, a lot of people, though, would argue that momentum was lost on the Democrats, who came back and kind of came up with this theory that they had to tell the story all over again.
And there's been some consternation internally within House Democratic leadership and among members about how the party handled the Mueller report episode. I mean, think back about it. Just getting him to testify was tricky. Getting the underlying evidence has proven tricky. They still have not gotten it. And in the House Judiciary Committee, some of the hearings were either non-existent and or when they got people in there became theater, essentially, an absurd theater at that. And so the consternation, the frustration that House leadership had was very apparent. And I think there is a bit of relief now that it's moved over to the intelligence community, the Intelligence Committee, and Chairman Adam Schiff, who has run a tighter ship in some regards, and for better or worse, has been able to get documents that had been proven elusive to Jerry Nadler.
So, Tarini, the question to you goes back to the poll numbers that I started this segment with. You don't often see 10 points in a week. That's real movement. We don't know where the floor or ceiling is here. But when you're looking to attribute it to something, is it as good a theory as any that the Ukraine story, a phone call, is an easier story to tell and digest?
I think there is some truth to that, and there is clear momentum. But if you look deeper in those poll numbers, you're seeing that the majority of the shift is coming from an increase in support among Democrats and, to a certain extent, among independents. But if you're looking at the Republican poll numbers, the Republican Party is still pretty much standing by President Trump, and we're not really seeing much movement there. The president's approval numbers as well are pretty much the same and have not seen as much movement. So I think moving forward, as this investigation continues, the thing to watch will be any sort of movement among those Republican voters and, of course, also the president's approval rating.
Tarini, I also wanted to play this for you. This is a Democratic member, freshman member of the House on Foreign Affairs. He said this on this network tonight.
I sense fear more than bluster. Look, this is the rare congressional investigation in which we already know most of the facts. Before we even begin, we're filling in a few details about maybe the circumstances under which the aid was cut off to threaten the Ukrainians, presumably to cough up this dirt. But they've admitted to the central fact that the president tried to extort election help from a foreign leader. We know this.
So that is New Jersey Democratic Congressman Tom Malinowski. Tarini, is his seeming confidence that they are starting to tell this story not on the letter A, but closer to the letter LMNOP. Is that confidence founded, you think?
I think what Democrats have to be careful of here is to make sure they're not sounding too confident and too political. I think we're hearing that from some of the more moderate Democrats in those swing states, really being careful in how they approach this. The way they're talking about it is that this is an inquiry, this is an investigation. We're going to see, where the facts lead us. You're kind of seeing similar language here from Speaker Pelosi and the people leading the Democratic Congressional Committee, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. People on those fronts are being a little bit more cautious in how they're approaching this.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.